it is another beautiful day in Boise. I'm Kaylin Stanley, and I will be your host as we explore another treasure in our hometown of Boise, Idaho. Today, we are taking a step back in time to discover what it was like in the early days for inmates serving their sentences at the old Penn. Joining us today is the director of Idaho State Historical Museum in Old Penn, Jody Ochoa. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Caitlin. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, what made you come to work at the Penn?
Well, I actually kind of got started in college, and I had a degree in museology from the University of Idaho. And when I got back home to Boise, I interned with the Historical Museum, and then they had an opening at the old Penn, so I ended up out there. And then eventually came back to the museum and worked down there, and am now the director there, and then they put me the old Penn under me too, so I've kind of gone full circle with that career choice.
So what are some of the rewards and challenges to working at the Historical Society?
Well, working at the old penitentiary is really incredible because it's one of the largest historical sites in Idaho. And it's so much fun to be able to have all those aha moments with the history that went on out there. And it's a really great place to work. Challenges are, we're always short of money. We've got to raise our money with admissions and events and all those sorts of things. And that's an old site. So lots of repairs, lots of upkeep, and really being vigilant about the buildings so that we can maintain them for the future so people can enjoy them then. And those are some of the big challenges we have.
Okay, so how did this all get started?
Well, the old Idaho Penitentiary was built started building it in 1870. And before that, many of the territorial prisoners, federal prisoners, were kept at Idaho City in the jail there. And it was overcrowded and really bad, so the government decided, well, Idaho needs a state penitentiary. So they started building it in Boise. And brought all the prisoners down and started off with one building out there, and one prisoner, and the first prisoner was a woman. Her name was Henneby, and she was an Indian woman that was out there. And then it just slowly grew and took place and took over.
So who built the walls and the buildings?
The inmates built the walls and the buildings, and throughout its history, 100-year history, inmates worked on a lot of building projects out there. They got most of the stone, they quarried it up from the Table Rock area, and they built the walls, they built the warden's house eventually, they built the buildings inside the penitentiary, and it was just a lot of hard work. And it was also a really good thing for the prison to have something for them to do and keep up with, not being lazy and not, having things to do out there.
So we have some film of the penitentiary as it is today. Can you tell us something about what we are seeing here?
Sure. Well, this is the administration building right here. That was one that was built later in the 20s. I think we're looking at the warden's office right now. And there are several things in there on exhibit. This looks like the exhibit we have in the front room that kind of gives you an overview of the penitentiary history with several artifacts of interest, and there's a ball and chain. This is the second building that was built on the penitentiary. These two were the 1890 cell blocks. This is the wall, and you can see the dead man zone right there, that strip of dirt. The first building we just went past, this is the dining hall that was destroyed in one of the riots. Now you're going into solitary confinement. Siberia is what they called it. It's really kind of an imposing place, very cold. And there's one of the guard towers in the wall. And that's the laundry room. And there are all the machinery is still intact from where they pressed and washed clothing. This looks like, I don't know where you guys are. Oh, that's the execution room. And that's where the visitors would have observed the execution. There was only one execution out there in that particular building. There were 10 altogether, but in that building, that's 5 House. That's death row. And those are, you know, things that the guards took from the inmates. They would hide and use them for weapons. This is 4 House. That was the largest cell house. That's the largest cell house on the site. It was built later. Should I keep talking? And this was the Curtis Earl exhibit. And that's kind of an addition to, it's in one of the older buildings of the penitentiary, and the donor gave us a huge collections of arms and armament throughout time, and we rehabilitated one of the older part of the old shirt factory and put that exhibit in there. It kind of goes through the different conflicts of the world through world history.
So what was the typical day like for an inmate?
Well, it depended on the era, and it depended on what the inmate was in there for. In the early days, they were in there, locked in their cells for like 21 hours a day. They couldn't talk. They couldn't, weren't allowed to communicate with each other. Then another philosophy of how to handle prisoners in correction facilities came forward, and that was to give them a job, keep them busy and occupied so they, wouldn't cause trouble, and also to help pay for their incarceration. And so you had prisoners building the walls, the buildings, and everything. You had, they had farms and, gardens where they, processed the food, canned it. Some of them worked in libraries, some of them worked in the food prep and that sort of thing. In 1966, I think it was Warden Lou Clapp that finally kind of did away with the silence and everything, and had them, they started the shirt factory out there, and they made license plates. They did all sorts of jobs, and they also had recreation, which really wasn't all they could do before was walk around the yard. But in the later years, they actually used some of those buildings to have sports events there, boxing and different things like that, and kind of, it became more of a free communication and things like that between the inmates.
So who is considered an infamous inmate?
Well, the one that comes to mind to me first is Lyda Southard, who was Idaho's Lady Bluebeard, and she was the woman who murdered several husbands and a child, I believe. And she'd brew up a little batch of tea with flypaper and poison them, bake them in pies and do things like that. And she was out in the women's ward of and she was one of the few escapees. And she actually escaped and was gone for about 9 months, I believe. They ran into her, and she was getting married to another poor guy who, when he figured out who it was, was happy to get out of it, I think.
So are there any particular inmates that stand out to you in your mind?
Well, Diamondfield Jack Davis was another inmate that was out there, and he was, in Idaho history, he was kind of well known for, he was accused of killing some sheepmen. He was hired by the cattle company, so during the cattle-sheep conflict, he was actually innocent, and they did a lot to prove him innocent, his attorney. And so he was out there for a while, and we also had a man whose name was Bob Meeks, and he was with the Butch Cassidy gang. So, if you've ever heard of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, that was where he came from. And the last inmate out there that was actually the last inmate that was hanged out there was Raymond Snowden, who murdered a woman in Garden City, and that was a really terrible crime.
So is it true that inmates were incarcerated in this facility until 1973?
Yes, and it was very antiquated and not in good condition at all, so it was really hard on the inmates.
So tell me about some of the events that led up to the closing of this prison facility.
Well, like I said, it was very old. Things hadn't been taken care of. It was falling apart. And in 1971, there was a really big riot that was kind of caused by the heat. It was during the summer, and that's when they burned the dining hall. And then in 1973, there was another riot, and it was based on a person who the prisoners felt the guards had mistreated him. And so when they had a riot over that one, and shortly after that, they moved them all to the new facility.
Okay, so tell me about Dennis the cat.
Okay, Dennis. Now, Dennis the cat was real, an inmate, and I don't know the name of the inmate who kind of fed him and kept him, and he lived in the prison, and he died there, and there is a little grave for Dennis out in the cemetery.
So what is your favorite part about the museum?
Well, I really like Siberia. I know it's kind of dark, but it's like it's a really amazing exhibit, and people really get a good idea of what it was really like to be in solitary confinement there. Plus there's graffiti on the walls from the prisoners who were counting the days in there. It's very, very cold in the wintertime. I mean, it's just terribly cold, and then in the summer it's pretty hot. So you go into that particular building and really get a feeling of how it was. But one of the other things I really love about the penitentiary, and this is, it's kind of weird that it's in a penitentiary, but Jackson Perkins is a company in Oregon that raised roses, and they talked the administration into being a test ground. And so there are all these beautiful roses out there in the inside the walls where the prisoners raised, and I think a couple of them they developed and sell them, and they still sell them, but they're, it's just really lovely in the spring and summer out there, even though all those things happened. So the rose gardens, people were hanged there, right? Yes. In the early days, there were 10 executions at the penitentiary, and many of them took place in the Rose Garden. I believe 6, possibly. 2 of them were outside the wall. That was in the early 1950. And then the last execution was Raymond Snowden, and that was actually in Five House, where the execution chamber is. So tell me about his death. It has been said that something went terribly wrong, and it took him a long 15 minutes to die. Well, there's kind of an art to the executioner's task, and something happened with the rope, and when it dropped, it didn't work as well as it should have, and sometimes that happens. I don't know if he was conscious at all at that time, but it did take a little longer to declare him. And so we were just talking about how the Rose Gardens, people were hanged there. I've heard that people back in the day, they used to climb up Table Rock to watch the people die. We don't have any evidence of that, and I don't think that the administration of the penitentiary would have allowed that. You know, there are stories of that throughout history where people have done that, but it didn't happen here as far as we know.
Okay, so is there anything else you think we should know before visiting the penitentiary?
Well, we have quite a few events coming up that people can come out and kind of experience the penitentiary firsthand. We have an event called Frightened Felons. We have always right around Halloween. This year it'll be the weekend right before Halloween. There's a family night and a night for other folks that are, you know, want to have a little more fun, not have the kids around. We also do Friday the 13th tours all the time. There are flashlight tours in the dark, and you can go through and take tours and do different programming activities. And then in November, we have Friday nights in November, and you can do that as well. So.
Awesome. So tell me about the trustees.
The trustees, there's a trustee dorm right next to the walls or the outside wall next to the administration building. There was one inside the penitentiary. We call it our false front buildings, and there are several in a row with kind of a tall brick facade, or a sandstone facade. Trustees were, you know, they were trusted, so they could do more. They had a little more freedom and did a few more things in the day-to-day activities of the penitentiary. Some of them went off-site. Some of them worked outside the walls all day, did different things. And
so did the men ever sneak to the women's ward?
I don't know if they did. We don't have any historical proof of that. I mean, we do have some instances, however, where one of the women inmates, she's kind of one of our more infamous ones, Josie Kensler, ended up pregnant when she was incarcerated out there, and that was quite a scandal.
So did people ever try to escape the jail?
Oh yes, there were several. I think there were, I wouldn't say, don't know the exact number, but well, Lyda Souther was an example of one. She actually did, but I think there were about 100 escape attempts over the years. Some were successful. Lyda is the one that comes to mind first for me, but most of the time they were caught.
Did JCs get imprisoned there?
JCs? I'm sorry.
It's okay. So, I don't know. Is there anything else you want to tell me?
Well, were you talking about the Earl exhibit or the J.C. Earl? The J.C. Earl exhibit, J. Curtis Earl was looking for a place. He amassed quite a collection of arms and armament throughout his life. And he really wanted some place to put it. And even though it was from all over the world, and there were, you know, things that weren't directly related to Idaho, he went to the governor, who was Governor Kempthorne at the time, and talked with him and reached an agreement that we would take the collection. So now out at the penitentiary, we have a really nice exhibit that kind of goes over the conflicts throughout world history and all the arms and armament, and that's the J.C. Earl exhibit is what that is.
Cool. So are you bringing back the transportation exhibit?
We are. We go through the state of Idaho Department of Public Works to get funding to help us with our buildings, and during the last legislative session, they gave us the money to refurbish that building and fix it. It won't be as it was. We will probably only use a few, maybe 5 vehicles will be in there, and it will be more of a gathering space for folks to, you know, if they want to have events out there, or and also it does have storage for our collection out there.
So we had an opportunity to speak with Irvin Swindle, a volunteer who has served at the Historical Society for more than 15 years. Let's now take a look inside where our crew discovered this treasure here.
He was raised down by Tremont, Utah, and he went to Utah State. down at Logan. And he had a degree in biology and wildlife management when he finished college, and he followed that career for a while in Arizona and Missouri. But he was more interested in planes and guns than he was in anything else, so he got dealing in guns. But anyway, he was into mining and precious metals. This is some of his catalogs and his arms dealing. Here's his business card. He had a home here in Boise and one in Phoenix. And it's up on Crestline Drive. This home that he had, his address is there. He was into everything, mining and precious metals. He was even into developing the first snowcats. And then there's a pretty good sketch of his life right here. He was a co-pilot on the B-25 when they made that movie Catch-22. He was a crew chief. He kept it running too.
Wow.
He could do a lot of things. This is, and there's a picture of him with his MiG-15. It's still sitting down in Phoenix. There's some of his warden badges over there when he was in that wildlife service with Missouri and Arizona. This little World War II AT-6 trainer, he had his granddaughter. She's a pharmacist, but she's a pleasure pilot, and she got checked out in that, so she kept that little World War II AT-6 trainer. The way this is kind of divided up, this center part is the Bronze Age, and just across the walls the Civil War. On the east side, the Spanish-American War. World War I's down in that corner, and World War II Pacific and Europe is over on the west and southwest side. And that Wake Island display, Morrison Knudsen Construction, you know who they are? About Morrison Knudsen. Well, they had boys, civilians on Wake Island when the Japanese captured it there in World War II. And that's some stuff from the boys that were over there that got captured. So,
Wow.
Yeah. So I don't know what, I'm not knowledgeable about guns to really tell you like a collector does.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like you have a lot of knowledge, though, about what is here at the Idaho Historical Museum.
Yes.
In particular, this display and the entire collection, I understand from Mr. J. Curtis Earl. You mentioned that as a boy he started collecting arrowheads. And when you said that, it occurred to me that, you know, a little boy's fancy going around in the dirt digging up arrowheads turned into all of this incredible collection. It's amazing, really, his whole life story. And as you said, he started out with that and moved on to lots of things.
I've read where as a boy, and of course, the World War II or World War I veterans that had brought stuff home, and you know, local boys in the area where he lived, and some of them were wanting to get rid of it. He'd grab it up and drag it home.
That's,
you know.
That's amazing.
He'd pick it up if they were going to do something with it. Why he wanted it.
That's
you know,
amazing.
and so he started collecting stuff from the World War I veterans when he was a young fellow.
Wow.
Still in school. Yeah. So
did you yourself serve in the armed forces?
yeah, in the Marine Corps. I was a short timer in the Marine Corps.
A short timer? Well, short or long, I want to genuinely thank you for your service to our country.
Yeah, I had a 2-year enlistment, so I had. Well, that's the same as people that were being drafted at the time, 1.5 or 2 years.
Wow. Do you mind if I ask what years that was when you were serving?
You're going to make me think back now.
Oh!
46 and 47.
Wow. Did you serve overseas?
No.
No.
I wasn't overseas. I was down at El Toro Air Force Base in California.
Wow.
That that's where I was when I got discharged.
Well, I'm really grateful that you served and that you survived that time, and you're here today to tell us about all these things.
Yeah, it was after World War II that when I served. Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah.
Wonderful.
Jody, tell me about Erwin Swindle's work with the old Penn.
Well, Irv is just one of our many incredible volunteers, and he's actually been with us for many, many years. We used to have a little exhibit in the called the Electrical Museum in the old trustee building and library on the false front area. And Irv was responsible, his group of volunteers from the phone company, and there were also volunteers from Idaho Power Company that set this up way back when the museum opened in the 70s. We've since closed that because we've decided to do other things with the building, and Irv moved over to take on the Curtis Earl exhibit, and he just does an incredible job, and that's something that really helps us with being able to present so well to the public. Is we have an amazing core of volunteers from all walks of life that get interested, and people are welcome to do that. We are always looking, so contacting the Old Penn staff out there if they're interested would be great.
So where can we get info about the old Penn?
Well, we have a lot of ways to get to us. We have the Idaho State Historical Society website, and you can get to the old Penn. We have a Facebook site. You just plug us in and find us. We can call out there, call the museum. We're always glad to answer questions, and we do have a lot of different events and things coming up where you can get even more information on the history out there.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us, Jody. We will
welcome.
see you guys next time.